that should we talk about? So I don't know, like, what do you guys think about? Should we have? Mostly when people say layer two, they mean the Lightning Network, but that fills me with dread. So I don't know if you feel the same way or not.
Yeah, I would agree to that a bit. I think there is no strict definition of what a layer two is. I think some people there is a bit of a conflict in the community. Some people qualify sidechains as layer two, some not. I mean, I personally wouldn't qualify them unless we have this trustless sidechain thing. I think we'll get that with Simplicity, but I think the only layer two we got is Lightning.
Yeah, I agree there are multiple definitions, and I remember a recent Twitter discussion where essentially, I think it was Color BTC proposed like, okay, there's only Lightning that's a layer 2, but yeah, that's kind of a bad definition, isn't it? Like layer 2 is...
I think it's a very bad definition. Like, isn't it?
Yeah.
The layer two should just be layer one. Your layer one Bitcoin Core full node software is not looking at it, but something else is happening. So I think even Open Dimes or something is some kind of layer two.
I think there can be multiple definitions, but in the end, what is a layer 2? Like, we extend Bitcoin's functionality, right? We extend its scalability, we extend its like scriptability maybe, and like the question is how can we do this? Like with Lightning, it's trustless. We have these channels. We have a network of channels where we can route in. With federations, in a traditional sense, you deposit money to multisig, and then have some sort of accounting system, which might be a sidechain, which is auditable, or it might be eCash, which isn't auditable, which allows users to use these Bitcoins in novel ways, more privately, more scriptable. Or you could even have like a non-custodial system, like drive chains. Like maybe you want to go into that.
Yeah, but okay, so Lightning, I think Lightning, the trust minimization is very extreme. I certainly agree with that 100%. But it's not really trustless, right? Because you still have 51% of miners can censor the justice transaction in Lightning and then steal from it. And then there's also the assumption that you'll be online and you'll catch the theft attempt. And there's like a lot of other stuff too, like that is just about kind of like so. But similarly with the federation, it's like the layer twos always have something where it's like there are some extra assumptions that and it's just like you have some costs and some benefits. I don't think that anything is like a pure benefit or pure cost. But Lightning is often held up as though it is perfectly trustless when it's merely like 95% trustless or whatever.
Yeah, I think the closest definition to me would be exiting from the layer without requiring any trust, including miners. With regards to 51%, I think that's quite accurate, right?
You say exiting doesn't require?
Yeah,
because they can either censor your attempt to exit or the justice transaction if you try to reply to being stolen from. So in both cases, you still have the 51%. You're still vulnerable to 51%, and you're also required to be vigilant.
Yeah, but the 51% is kind of inherited from the Bitcoin base system.
I agree with that. No, I agree with that. But then with DriveChain, I built it around that. I thought, who will care because this is the same. But then it turned out to be people say they care. I don't know if they really understand what they're talking about.
I think the difference with DriveChains is that 51, the majority of hash power can steal from the DriveChain, but in Lightning and on chain, they can only freeze your coins, not steal.
Well, they can't steal, though. I mean, I presented about this in Lisbon. It just requires a little setup. In all the cases, they can't just snap their fingers and steal, right? Of course.
From Lightning, maybe, but on-chain funds, they're not enabled.
Yeah, because you can, if A is paying B, like 7 Bitcoin, then what the miner can do is they can say, I'm going to reorg, and then I'm going to hold the transaction hostage between A and B. So this is extremely bizarre and weird, but theoretically, this is a theoretical kind of a thing. But they go between A and B, and they say, listen, what you're going to do is going to pay more. If A pays more, I'll never let this transaction in, and A can keep the money and whatever they bought whenever they made the transaction. And then you'll say, well, I'll never put this transaction in, but you've got to pay me 6.99 BTC. And then they go to B and they say, well, listen, he's giving me 6.99. Right now you're getting nothing. But if you give me 6.999 BTC, I'll push the transaction through. And so it's very theoretical and bizarre, but ultimately I agree with that characterization that the 51% hash rate is that's just saying proof of work is the consensus mechanism. and it doesn't say anything else. And everything from sort of springing from that, I think.
So I wouldn't qualify reorging as stealing, because if we, as a community, identify a miner maliciously reorging the chain, we can simply USF. Although obviously it's dangerous, but hypothetically possible.
To USF what?
Yeah, to force miner out of the network.
Well, again, no, but then that's just like, that is going down a weird road where you say we're not actually proof of work, we're like this other thing. And I actually agree that with that, when push comes to shove, it's not really proof of work, like pure proof of work. It's like the proof of work is a kind of tool we use to accomplish like an even more general set of principles, like we want we want this to be a bank that doesn't steal from people. So I agree with that, but I also don't agree that. But of course, each layer 2 is quite different, and they have pros and cons, and they have. But I'm just saying that the 51% assumption, I think it is, to a first approximation, very accurate to just say that that is baked into the blood of everything that Bitcoin touches.
I think that actually makes an interesting point that we, for a definition that we can at least all agree on for layer 2. Layer 2 will always inherit the same trust assumptions as layer 1. Like, we cannot do any better on layer 2 than on layer 1.
I think that's true.
Yeah, and that's true for Lightning, that's true for federations. Like, for example, in both Liquid and Fediment, we need to have a relatively high amount of blocks that we wait till we accept a block is valid or a transaction is confirmed, because otherwise we cannot really deal with rollbacks or with forks. And so we inherit this this property that we depend on there not being like a extended 51% attack, and like the same is probably true for drive chains, I guess.
Well, with drive chain, of course, I kind of went for, I sort of just like, we can't do anything about the 51% attack, so I was like, well, let's just make it so that it's fully open to whatever the 51% attack is going to do. But of course, since that would be ridiculous to do only that, I threw also that 3 to 6 month super delay thing, and the idea that it's all covered in the envelope of one single hash, so that it's very, 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 very easy to tell when something has gone wrong. But yeah, I think that's accurate.
So I think there is a huge design space, no matter if we call it layer 2 or not, just to appease Burak here. But there is a huge design space beyond Lightning that we can still explore. Like, there are drive chains, there are federations, there's like Sapio and Covenants, and like we had an awesome panel at Socratic Village about that. And yeah, I think we should do more exploration there. Like, what would you like to see? Like,
oh yeah, I 100% agree. The layers above the on-chain, I mean the main chain, inherits the security product of Bitcoin, and that obviously there is nothing we can do about it. And obviously, I wouldn't call again Liquid or RSKey a layer 2 only. Maybe RSKey, maybe depends. I mean, so I think federated sidechains do not qualify as layer 2 at all, but I think we definitely need them. I mean, personally, I'm mostly working on Liquid stuff, and most recently we launched an automated market maker on Liquid. We definitely need more experimentation and more talents and people, doing and building stuff on layers. I mean, on side chains on top of Bitcoin.
Yeah, I was at Baltic Honey Badger. I was on there was a layer 2 panel, and that also was the consensus there, where people were really like, there's going to be this big spectrum of, there's going to be great music, first of all, and there's also going to be a big spectrum of layer 2s that are all different, that meet different, that have different costs and benefits, and they have different, meet different people's needs.
yeah, definitely. Like, for example, when people ask me about different types of federations, then like what comes to mind is Fediment and Liquid, and they are quite different. Like, both provide some sort of privacy. Like, Fediment provides like this absolute privacy. You don't have to do anything. With Liquid, you have confidential transactions, and if you transact in a certain manner, you have the same privacy. But like, the big difference comes in at auditability, because Fediment is fundamentally, due to the privacy properties, not auditable. While with Liquid, as long as you trust the cryptographic assumptions, you have a full auditability, and you can just check how much Bitcoin are in multisig that's backing the federation and how many Bitcoin are on chain. and that's like a useful property. And I could imagine there to be like a few more other design spaces that we haven't explored yet. For example, like a federated Zcash, which provides like the same privacy as a federated eCash system by default, but like requires more data syncing when you run it as a client or when you want to transact. And by doing so, we gain the auditability. And like I think there's still a lot of experimentation to be had. And eventually, maybe some of these proposals or what we come up with might come back to Bitcoin through techniques like drive chains or other ways to, like maybe you have trustless packs of some sort.
Well, yeah, we have a Zcash BIP300 drive chain, which is kind of neat that people can play with, and it does better because on Zcash you don't know if there's an inflation bug, but in the sidechain world, it doesn't matter quite as much because the inflation bug would only destroy that sidechain. So, and you would know, like, you just get in, mix the coins, or do whatever you got to do, and then get out. You don't have to stay there. But yeah, I think that's. I've heard that people involved with Liquid sometimes are confused by because Fediment has become very popular all of a sudden, and Fediment is like a Liquid, but easier to steal from you, but it's more private maybe, or a question mark. So I don't know if you want to talk about that or not.
Yeah, there is this big difference of auditability. Like a Liquid Federation or like an Elements Federation could not run fractional reserve. That just doesn't work. Like the Elements D would detect it and stop the network essentially. While on Fediment, it could happen. Like there you can run fractional reserve in theory, but that assumes that your federation is compromised, like the T out of N parties are actually malicious. And like that's your base assumption that that's not the case, because even in Liquid, if that was the case, the federation members could right out steal your money. So I don't think it's that much of a problem. Even so, like it definitely can be a consideration when choosing the right system for the right job. And that's what I would advocate for, like just use the right system for the job.
Yeah, I agree to that. It's engineering, and in engineering there are trade-offs, and I think Liquid checks the auditability bugs, and I think Fediment does a better job in terms of privacy. But I think as a Liquid community, if we identify some functionaries as malicious, we can also USF Liquid. Obviously, the functionaries can steal the on-chain funds from the Bitcoin mainnet, but at least we can recover the assets.
Yeah, that's a great observation. While I'd say like detecting that federation members are malicious is a little bit hard to do, because ideally the malicious members wouldn't act until they have a majority with which they can achieve their goals. So before that, acting doesn't make sense to them, and so you cannot detect them until this point. And once they have the majority, or like this T out of N, then they can just do anything. Like then you cannot kick them out anymore, which is kind of problematic. But yeah, I guess with Liquid we have the additional like security of the HSMs, and we could detect if someone tampers with the HSM and then just kick them out. I don't know. I'm not working on that, so
yeah. No, these HSMs and also the UASF. I mean, that's like a big circular logic kind of a thing, right? Because the UASF, you can do everything with the UASF. You could steal the funds, you could block thefts of the fund, you could like do a lot. You can do an awful lot with the UASF is a little too powerful.
Yeah. So maybe do we want to present our systems a bit, or do we assume people mostly know them?
Maybe
or
we
do
should.
we just
I
want to
suppose.
take questions? I don't know.
If people have a pressing question, then
because I kind of stumbled
feel
into this.
free.
Apparently, someone thought I would be the moderator, and
No, yeah. Well, you want to do? Okay, I'll do. So BIP300 is very old. It's from November 2015. It's very old, and it's recently gone from being very ignored and unpopular to being like 10% popular. So most improved, and it is. But it's a pretty great idea, because I just say that there's 3 to 6 months of sidechain activities just compressed into this one hash, and then miners spend a long time, months, just like agreeing on it, and that defines the withdrawals. And if you do that plus merge mining, it turns out you have infinite sidechain capabilities, and sidechain means that you can send the BTC to a different blockchain. So you can have small blocks and large blocks at the same time. So for example, we copied Zcash into a BIP300 sidechain, and we copied Ethereum. And we also copied, we have a version that just has a it's a copy of Bitcoin Core with a larger block size. So, and we have a version that does, basically NFTs, but they're UTXOs instead of Ethereum accounts. So they're way better. You can put them in like multisig, or you can put them in whatever. So that's that idea. And then I guess you're going to do Liquid and how many things you're going to do? Why don't you talk about some other non-Lightning layer 2s?
So the goal of Liquid is to become, from what I observe, and I agree, to become the financial layer of Bitcoin. And the idea is to observe what's happening in the alt-chain space and bring these meaningful use cases onto Liquid, such as AMMs and options and lending and all this financial stuff into Bitcoin. And I think that's inherently it's possible, but not the goal of Fediment. So we are having different purposes.
Yeah, like Fediment was totally inspired by Liquid. Like when it came out in 2018, I thought and was like amazed by the idea of making Bitcoin so versatile. Because like you can do anything with a federation really, as long as you have the right cryptographic primitives. And so I came up with the idea of federated eCash, which has these awesome privacy properties. And thought like, okay, why should we have this sidechain if the federation is malicious, they can rug pull us anyway. And like auditability wasn't on the top of my mind. So I made this trade-off in a sense that I want to explore this path of perfect privacy. But later on, it actually developed more into like a generalized federation framework. And what I want to see actually is people experimenting with different ways of like making Bitcoin programmable, making it more private, making it more scalable. Like there are many things that are still unexplored in the non-Lightning layer 2 space. And yeah,
should we try to list like state chains would be one, right? Should we I think like vaguely open dimes is it's very bizarre. You have to stretch your mind, but that's like putting coins in like a physical object and then moving it around.
Yeah, like eCash was kind of unexplored for a long time.
Yeah, like, there was a very weird one that wasn't. It was everyone ignored it and they didn't like it. It called T-Chan or whatever by Imran Goodsire. Super obscure. But I'm just trying to think of like every single one on the list that I would say is a non-Lightning layer 2.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, even implementing certain kinds of smart contracting platforms in federations, like we don't have to be as efficient as Bitcoin on-chain, and like we don't need to work in the UTXO model in federations necessarily, because at least if we say like they can serve a much smaller community, like with Fediment, then we can make totally different trade-offs. We can actually run programs in there, like if it makes sense, like.
Yeah, one goal of Liquid is to become also to become the testbed of Bitcoin. So Liquid is based on the Bitcoin core code base, and we have added a bunch of new functionality like confidential transactions and some new advanced scripting primitives. And for instance, we had a bunch of new opcodes bundled with Taproot on Liquid early this year, and we can see what's going on, and we can bring these functionalities later on onto Bitcoin potentially.
Okay, yeah, I think we had questions.
I saw, right? Someone already got a mic over there.
And some of that stuff from Liquid eventually made it on into Taproot, into the real. Well, Segwit and Taproot were both. Well, Schnorr, I don't know exactly how it worked out in the end, but a lot of stuff that was over on.
Yeah,
was
I
called
think the
Elements.
code base of Schnorr existed first on Elements, but the actual activation happened rolled out after the mainnet. But everything except Schnorr probably rolled out on Liquid first.
Do the panelists have any opinions about validity rollups or rollups in general as a non-Lightning layer 2?
I see sidechains and rollups as very similar, or at least my conception of them is like the sidechain is like an optional thing that you're not looking. It's an optional second block that you're not looking at, and then the question is, since you're not looking at it, because they're supposed to be separate networks, and your layer 1 full node is not responsible for what they're doing. Because of that, you still have to try and do something to try and make this make it believable to the users of that network that you actually get money. If you get paid over there, you'll actually be able to redeem those coins for money, which is the same as all the layer twos. They have to have like what's the guarantee that my property rights of my coins will be respected. And so the roll-ups, I see, it depends on exactly the details, of course, but it's kind of like you're putting very little information on layer one. There's a lot more on layer two that you're ignoring, and so I guess the sidechain is very much like an optimistic roll-up because you're just saying this is all here, and then only when it goes wrong will some kind of big feedback loop start to trigger to try and set things right. So I think in that way they work basically the same way. I don't know if they work. I don't think they work very similar.
See them as like a ideal sidechain, right? It's like trust. It's fully trustless.
I don't see because you're saying the ZK rollups.
Yeah, validity rollup.
I've always thought that is the ZK. I've always thought that is not really. First of all, it doesn't really make it because to me the sidechain concept is essential that it's ignorable and that it's actually you're not checking the validity, believe it or not. But that's a good thing in a couple different ways. So one is you have to build the ZK prover on layer one to have the ZK thing, and that is a new thing that becomes mandatory on layer one. So that I've never thought that was a good idea. The only way to know if the ZK prover has not malfunctioned is the auditability question, is that you have to download all the layer 2 stuff also and then check it against the ZK prover. So it's not clear. The ZK prover tries to do two things at once. On one hand, it says this is small and it's always right. But on the other hand, it says it's like a claim to infallibility. And so it's saying that this will always be correct no matter what, but on the off chance that how do you know that it's correct? The only way is to download all the layer 2 data. The other thing is someone has to serve the layer 2 data. You have the data availability problem.
Yeah, on that, it's maybe a bit of a controversial thing to say, but I think Bitcoin is a very friendly environment for rollups because in rollups you need data availability and you can and Bitcoin and the witness data in Bitcoin is discounted. In theory, you can fill a full block of rollup proofs for megabyte. Rollup proofs, and obviously you still need the expressiveness, and ideally we'll getting the rollup expressiveness with simplicity.
Yeah, I would come from another perspective, and that is like to do zero knowledge rollups, you need new cryptographic primitives, at least as far as we know right now. Like I think most of the efficient zero knowledge systems that we have right now are pairing based. And like that's a new cryptographic assumption we don't want to get into in general, I think. Like Bitcoin's very conservative about these things, and like if we can get like really efficient SecP based zero knowledge proofs, maybe that would actually be a possibility to get it one day, especially maybe if we get something like simplicity, where you can, if you have like the elliptic curves primitives, then you could even build your own verifier, for example, for zero knowledge proofs inside Bitcoin script, essentially, or simplicity script then.
Yeah, but I have one other two-part point that I have to make, which is that the 51% hash rate can always just block anything, including anything that's important for the ZK proof, or just the whole proof itself, because they decide what is in a block and what is not. So they can always maliciously block it or extort it. And then the other thing is there's nothing stopping you from, on the layer 2, whatever it is, could be anything. Could be Fedimint, could be whatever, BIP300. You could always put there some kind of like, whenever it's invented, the ZK summarizer thing. So you could still have it there. So between those two things, I don't know how much is really gained by saying this is the, but yeah, some people are very interested in this idea of the perfect layer 2 enforced by the magic moon math of the ZK snark.
So I have an adoption question. I guess Fedimint is still in development, but maybe Bitmetrics could answer this. How has it been to get adoption on your product? I see your daily volume is around $200.
Oh yeah, right. So that's the biggest challenge, right? In Liquid, no one pretty much uses Liquid. That's the challenge. So, I mean, in terms of development, it has been very challenging. We've been working on this for 2 years, more or less, and we rolled out the mainnet beta. We haven't really seen quite much of a usage. And I believe we'll see organic but slow growth over time. I have faith in Blockstream's agenda.
Why do you think no one's using it?
I think we are mostly targeting Bitcoiners, right? That's the target. If you're a shitcoiner, you rather use BSC or some other EVM. And Bitcoiners more tend to hold Bitcoin rather than utilizing it. But I think, yeah, Bitcoiners are not monoliths, right? There is a wide spectrum of Bitcoiners, and we can target this.
Yeah, and to be honest, BitMatrix is the first great tooling that I've seen around, like DEXs on Liquid. Like before that, I don't know, was there anything that was really user-friendly or could be actually used?
Yeah, we had a bunch of DEXs based on, not based on Bitcoin script. We were the first practical, fully functional AMM. We had atomic swap-like solutions before. I would say they were as user-friendly as ours, but we were the only AMM. So
I think that there's a big Bitcoin cultural force, or whatever you want to call it, where most people are interested in Lightning or Bitcoin, and so it's actually very challenging for any sidechain project. The sidechain group is constantly losing people, because if you could have someone, like, you imagine a situation in the ancient past, and if Vitalik Buterin shows up and he's a Bitcoiner, he's one of the founders of Bitcoin magazine, and then he wants to do his wacky project. And people obviously have mixed opinions about the project, but the point is, eventually he's like, well, I can't do this here, so I'm going to start my own project. And then a million people have done that type of thing, where they say, well, I really, really want to do such and such, like ring signatures with Monero. And they're like, well, I can't. So then they're out. And some people have used that as an excuse. That's a pretext, and they're lying. But the whole point is,
in user base, very slight. I mean, we used to have blocks of no transactions, but nowadays a fifth transaction at least. It's something. We'll get there.
I have
Any
not
other
yet turned on.
questions?
Yes. Does anyone have any more questions? BIP 300 only exists on testnet, so I can just say that there will be 1 billion users when I turn it on. But
Yeah.
until then, I don't get any embarrassment, really,
Yeah,
because
that's quite a bold claim. Yeah.
Yeah. And well, there is one Fedimint federation right now on mainnet. It's not really public. I just used it as a demonstration, because currently I'd be way too scared that people lose money there. Because yeah, we aren't at that point yet. But I hope we will get there by maybe end of year, beginning of next year. That like first, like small communities, really technical people can try it out. And then like it will be interesting to see. Like, I think Fedimint has like great potential for fast growth, because you don't need to be on Fedimint to interact with Fedimint. It has a Lightning integration, so you instantly get access to the entire Lightning ecosystem. So we don't have the chicken and egg problem that Liquid might have.
What is a good definition of a sidechain, including why is Liquid one but not Coinbase? Or is Coinbase one?
it's a good question. I mean, some people, there was a joke. There was that guy Jorge Stolfi, who wrote that post, "My sofa is a sidechain." So some people have complained in the past, but I think to me, I'll give you my own. I mean, I call it a universal altcoin emulator, but that is a weird definition. So the better one is to say it's an altcoin, but with Bitcoin. So it's basically everything in altcoin is a separate piece of software, but there's no competing coin. There's like Ethereum, but there's no Ether, or Zcash, but there's no ZEC. And so the sidechain is its own piece of software. You can make all the mistakes you want over there. It can have its own development team. It can do great things. It can do really stupid things. And it starts with no coins, and you send your Bitcoin over to it. That is why it is necessarily a layer 2, because the sidechain must watch layer 1 so that it knows when people have deposited.
So my definition of sidechain would be, sidechain is a piece of software where you can peg in Bitcoin and peg out, and Bitcoin being the underlying native asset. Yeah,
I agree with that, and would probably add, just to distinguish it from Coinbase, that you should have programmable money, like of some sort. Like that's true for Liquid. That will probably be true for any reasonable drive chain.
You could have a custodial sidechain. It would be like absurd, but definitions are. There's a big graveyard of definitions in this industry. So, but yeah, I say the first thing. What I would do is I say the first thing is whether or not it's custodial. I do that first. Then it's a sidechain. If in the non-custodial world, if you have sent coins to a different piece of software that is.
I mean, that's a spectrum.
A blockchain.
Really. Like that. Currently, there aren't any fully non-custodial sidechains, right? Like it's always a federation right now.
Right now,
that in the end, like holds the coins. So like I'd call it like trust minimized maybe.
Well, I think that's another good point because this is a big thing in the industry is to say the trustless thing or the trust minimized thing. I'm not sure if that is actually helpful, even though that is what everyone does and that's the big mainstream terminology. I think instead people should just say these are the trade-offs or these are the problems. Like this is what is going on because people are, one thing that I would really try to stress is that people are very different and the transactions are very different. So you could have the same person, you could be like Ross Albright and you could be like selling like $300 million worth of cocaine to someone or something. And that should probably be on layer 1 or that should be on the Zcash sidechain or something. That should be very private. But if Ross Albright wants to buy coffee, he could use like a very large block sidechain, that's not decentralized or is not as decentralized. And it doesn't matter. It could be the same person, but same person making a different type of transaction. Not every transaction has the same need. So there would be, I think ideally there would be a whole spectrum of things, many of which less decentralized. And some maybe would even be, like you can imagine there's a sidechain that has a lot of privacy and maybe even really small blocks or something smaller than the Bitcoin layer 1 blocks. I'm not sure that would make sense because you'd have to add them up. But my point is that it's not always, we have all shapes and sizes, I think. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. In the end, we have these definitions and words, so we can compress what we want to convey. Like, unfortunately, people have only so much time when they want to learn about these systems. So we have to find some terminology that makes sense, I think.
It's a very good point, though. But I stress, historically, the sidechain idea used to be linked inextricably to the altcoin. So it was used to be like this. We have all these altcoins now, or we have a different version of Bitcoin that would be incompatible, like it has a version of Bitcoin with ring signatures or a larger block size version of Bitcoin that would be not compatible with the hard fork of Bitcoin. That was the problem like in 2013, 2014, 2015. And so the idea was, well, here's this thing called the sidechain, and it's like that, but you don't launch your own coin. So that historically was the core heart and soul of the idea. So that's why I would cling desperately to that definition, but I don't know how well it's going to hold up.
Anyone else? Okay.
Do you think in a post sidechains being adopted and very mature, do you think that in that kind of world, does that take a lot of the wind out of Lightning sails? Do you think Lightning will be as important in a L2 alternative L2?
Well, the key to that question is how much wind it gets right now, because it gets quite a bit. But recently, I mean, we had a lot of stuff today. Including Matt Corrales' talk yesterday, where even the people who are at the tip top of the Lightning Network are trying to take a little bit of wind out of their own sails and say that this is a big, overwhelming task that's going to take many years. So I think the answer is yes. I think a lot of it was the scaling war where Lightning was like the #1 thing, so to keep the message simple, people kind of went all in on it. I don't know. Is that very unfair, or is it super fair and dead on?
I'd say blockchains still don't scale, fundamentally not.
Yeah, well, so people say that too. That's a trope. But with the sidechain concept, you have the idea is you'd have like a tree of sidechains, like almost all of which you would ignore. Like there'd be like the U.S. East large block sidechain or whatever. And then there'd be like whatever, like the China transaction sidechain in like the Europe sidechain Europe, and you would only download your like part of the thing. So even though the sidechain, each individual sidechain is a global all or nothing validation, once you have them work as a team, it is different. So even though it's true, the frustrating thing about that is it's true that the sidechain doesn't scale per se because it's a single global all or nothing state, but the strategy of scaling with sidechains has not been that. It's way more nuanced than that. It's like we'll have different sidechains with larger blocks, and they'll be geographically or distributed in some kind of way where the payments within the group are way more likely than among. And furthermore, the idea that it's night and day, then the distinction between layer 1 and layer 2 is very much a night and day distinction, because what the attacker will do depends crucially on what they hope to achieve. So if everything is like in like a Bitcoin SV or like a Solana large blockchain, which we laugh at correctly because it just means that the clock is ticking, they're literally digging their own grave deeper and deeper the whole time, and it'll become easier and easier to just pour a bunch of dirt on the top of the grave. But that is because it will kill them instantly. But if they're layer 2s, then they're kind of just on pause temporarily. Like the layer 1 is still stamping out blocks every 10 minutes. So it's kind of like the attacker may decide that they can't, what are they going to do? Like, all they would do is shut off US East, and then those people could like start to move to, the Europe sidechain temporarily, or miscellaneous sidechain or something. So it's not ironclad, but I'm just saying that is not it's true that sidechains don't scale. Like, it's true that each individual blockchain is global, and so that's probably not going to work, but that's not what the scale with sidechains strategy is.
Yeah, what you just described sounds a lot like sharding, and we haven't really seen sharding work in practice yet, I think.
Well, but I think that I don't see any theoretical reason why it wouldn't work. In fact, what we do see is we see a lot of people pushing the envelope, sacrificing lots of decentralization, and sort of getting away with it for now, which is frustrating if you are Bitcoin being the most decentralized project. That means we are at a disadvantage because we are building up all this defensive resistance. And even the regulator can be very manipulative. They can say, like, for the first 10 years, we will enforce nothing. And then that gives a huge advantage to Solana or whatever, because who cares? And then after Solana does a big marketing campaign, or whatever you want to call it. This is a big Solana commercial, in case you haven't realized. But after they do that, then they can be like, they can spring their trap or whatever it is. So it's good. It's a good thing for Bitcoin to be able to hit the whole range of stuff, including less decentralized projects, because we pick up the same users and we keep them in the little silo away from everything else. And so we pick them up as users, and then if that gets killed off, then so will Solana and Ethereum and Bitcoin SV and etc. So, but if it doesn't, then we never needed to. We dodged the bullet. We never needed to worry per se about.
As a distributed systems engineer, I'd say if we can avoid the need for some global consensus, then we should always do it. And in that sense, I think Lightning will always be relevant, if only as a way to communicate between different side chains, if we want to call them that way. Or like in the case of Fedimint, it's different federations that want to communicate with each other that are themselves local. Like you described the US East, for example, sidechain. But how do you get from one of these systems to another? That requires some sort of settlement system, and I don't think
it's very easy in that case, because you can either use HTLC or just use whatever, Coinbase or something, and just swap the tokens. And you don't even necessarily have to go through someone. When there's too much of a net demand, will have to go through layer 1. But layer 1 right now can do 2,000 transactions on layer 1 like every 10 minutes, which is way more than enough. Again, the sidechain strategy is not to have a total global thing. You said something, Lightning. So that's the other thing. My conception of Lightning is very different than I think most people's, like Lightning is super fast, Lightning also is, it is a kind of thing that it is not only fast, but it's immune to the 10-minute timer thing, the 10-minute check-in, the block pulse. And it can be a source of like anti-denial of service that is not coming from the miners themselves. So even though it is vulnerable on the edges to the 51%, just like everything is, I wrote a post a long time ago, I think 2016, about fraud proofs, and they require you to have either a channel, either a bidirectional payment channel or a Lightning channel with someone else who has a full node, because that was the only way to deter spam. Well, the point is, it was just like technically required for. You can read the post if you want. I think it's 46 pages long. So, but there are some images in it. But so I see Lightning as very like kind of different. I think the instant thing will be big for Lightning. Certain types of it can do certain types of things that I see it as like a different category thing. But most other people just see it as the scaling messiah or whatever.
Yeah, I think in an ideal world we'll be seeing multiple Lightning networks on top of different networks. One on Bitcoin, one on Liquid, and these layer 2s or sidechains can interoperate each other. So, for instance, you can have a smart contract on Liquid network or in another sidechain, and without needing a Liquid wallet, an on-chain wallet, you can use a Lightning wallet and do a submarine swap onto the application and do your thing, and then swap out back to your Lightning wallet.
That's a vision I can get behind. Yeah, I think that's also how I imagine the future. Like these networks wouldn't be distinct, wouldn't be disconnected actually. Like there would be border gateways that can translate between the different trust assumptions. That's how we do it with Fediment. Like a federation cannot natively interact with Lightning, so we have this thing called the Lightning Gateway, and that essentially translates the difference in trust. Like the gateway has to trust the federation, and has to trust kind of the Lightning assumptions that it will be online, that it can like retaliate if a peer tries to steal money from it. And that's how we can probably bridge all these different systems.
Yeah, I agree to that. I think the end goal for Lightning is to be the gate between these separate chains.
The lingua franca
Yes,
for
we have
Bitcoin.
a question.
Yeah, I was just going to make one more comment. I mean, the discussion was going fine. So I was just wondering, like, I get the sense with these side chains and these different coins, and everyone's kind of like, okay, well, the 21 million, right? Like that's obviously very important. So looking out for like inflation resistance, I feel like in the current culture is very, very important. And I feel like that do you feel like maybe that's part of the resistance to these sidechain models, where like, wait, all this activity that could go on in all these other places, is that respecting the 21 million, limit, or are we not there yet? Maybe there's a point in the future where like, Bitcoin's success to that degree where, it's going to replace all the money is more secure that we can start doing these experiments. Like, I don't know, does that resonate with you guys at all, or have you thought about that?
I don't think that's the case, because every sidechain's just like every layer 2. You have to do something on layer 1 to like put the coins in there. So sidechains are very different than, so with Lightning, each like person has to make like a multi-sig output. Those are the channels that the Lightning Network is made of. The sidechain, you can do something kind of weird where you send 100 coins over there with one guy, and then that person can onboard people over there. But in all cases, the coins themselves someone has to choose to move them from layer 1 to layer 2. So I don't think there's the layer 2 thing, I think, is very strong protection against any 21 million coin violation thing, because on layer 1 you can still look at what the output is and see how many coins are in there.
I think
if anything, we would blame Fediment for all of that, because you have no idea how many, whatever, Chaumian, is there a name for them that I don't know, the coins?
Chaumian eCash nodes, I'd say.
You don't know how many tokens how many coins they're minting out.
Yeah, but I'd say the important point is that no single layer 2 that could lead to inflation becomes so big that it might be like a systemic risk to Bitcoin. That's the most important part for me, and that's why, like, fundamentally with Fediment, we are aiming to have small community federations that are interconnected. So even if one of them fails, or one of them has an inflation bug, or like the guardians collude against the users, then that's not a systemic risk to Bitcoin. It's bad for the local community, yes, but yeah, in that sense, I'm a little bit scared. Like if any Like if any sidechain became too dominant, and also has the privacy features that doesn't allow like audits without cryptographic assumptions. That's even the case for Liquid. Like if the cryptographic assumptions were broken, I'm not entirely sure if it breaks privacy or if it breaks auditability. Like you can often make this distinction, but like there might be some sort of sidechain that breaks the auditability, and then you could have silent inflation. If that sidechain is really big, then that could essentially have detrimental effects for Bitcoin, because like if everyone is on a sidechain, then like it doesn't
Yeah,
make much
I
of a
get this
difference.
argument sometimes, and I think it's true. But the problem with it is not that it's false. The problem is that I think the analogy would be, you have this thing, the sidechain super popular. The analogy would be like there's some altcoin that's become super popular, and like so more than half of the people are using that. And in that case, Bitcoin, the layer 1 Bitcoin node is way more affected than in the sidechain case, because it threatens the whole existence, I think, of the.
Yeah, I agree to the security assumption. There exists always such a risk, but I think sidechains can also add a value in terms of divisibility. In a hyper-Bitcoinized world where we live in, in a world where a Satoshi is unaffordable for someone to pay, in sidechains you can divide a single Satoshi into millions of other milli-Satoshi units, and that'd be useful for payments. And a Lightning on top of a sidechain where a Satoshi is more divisible makes more sense in a hyper-Bitcoinized world, yeah.
And this idea has been floated many times too, which is the Lightning on the sidechain idea, which is I think is a very good, because the Lightning has, I think, kind of a big onboarding problem, since everyone needs a UTXO on whatever network it's resting on. So sidechain would eliminate that problem, but the sidechain also has the disadvantage that it is slower. The BIP300 merge mining sidechain is slower because you don't know that every confirmation is as reliable, since there's no block subsidy. There's a lower amount of fees. You don't know exactly what the participation is, so the confirmations are actually worth less on the sidechain, so everything is slower. But if you open the Lightning channel on the sidechain, then the confirmation speed doesn't make any difference, and the payments are still instant.
Right. You could just choose higher like timeouts, or like minimum timeouts.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Should we say?
Otherwise, we will conclude it here, I guess.
Okay, great.
Then yeah.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.